Hi folks, it is Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video, and for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter and also guitar tutor based in Southeast London. Today I am very excited to be back on my channel. I have been away for a little bit. I was visiting family, and also just things come up, I think, and so I try to stay up to date with the videos I do, and I try to do them when I feel most inspired, so as to not make the video feel like, you know, really drawn out or something like I don't want to do, because the reality is I love doing stuff like this. In today's video, I am going to be playing some parts of a song by John Mayer called Daughters. This is an old song he released in 2003. And I'm going to be doing an analysis of the song as well, talking about the chords, why do they work, and part of why it is enjoyable to basically listen to. The reason why I was inspired to do this video is actually because I was on Facebook. I saw an article about something St. Vincent had said about how this is the most sexist song ever made, and she thinks it's the worst song ever written. And actually, what I have to say about that is I think this is a very well-written song, and it's incredibly sexist too. And so it's interesting to think that we're going to try to discount the ability of the songwriter, when in fact the song was very well written. I remember when this came out, I was like 8 or 9 years old. I remember it was really popular. People freaking loved this thing. And I remember, as someone who was already very interested in music, someone who enjoyed music like the Beatles and other very popular, very well-written music, I regarded this as a song that I kind of hated for how well it sounded, like how good and how effective it delivered its message. And I think that might actually, in fact, I would almost argue that part of the reason why St. Vincent hates this song so much is probably because of how effective it was at delivering its sexist message. I do believe probably the lyrics were done with some kind of good intention. And I will also add that I think part of the challenge of the songwriter is to communicate a message that they believe in. And so the problem with that is we tend to people generally tend to believe in whatever we believe at any given time. A lot of songwriters like Captain Beefheart or Frank Zappa or other musicians like to talk about, at least politically, from a political standpoint, some other musicians like to talk about what we would like to see change. Like Idols, I think, is probably a good example of that. But when it comes down to it, I think that a musician has the challenge of basically creating something that sounds familiar to us and simultaneously introduces new themes to their audience. So I think, weirdly, I think this was a progressive song for its time, because it was actually, I think, talking about something like intergenerational trauma, or like how to actually raise children. And that was actually, I think, a subject of content that was actually for a long, long time kind of taboo to not be discussed, especially in American culture. How parents and families raise their kids is like a very private kind of thing that no one can tell you how to do. And it's actually hugely problematic in its own right, because actually that leads to things like child abuse and all sorts of other stuff. So I think this was actually progressive for its time. I don't know if today it makes as much sense. I also don't think he would necessarily write a song like this today. But I do believe that as far as songwriting goes, this is a very, very well-written piece of music. And it's part of why it was so popular. And it's probably part of why she actually still even remembers it today and to hate it so much. You know, there has to be something, it's redeeming property. And I actually have a lot of respect for John Mayer. And this isn't to defend the theme of the song or anything like that. It's just to say that I think as far as musicians go, I think he's very accomplished. And so anyway, now that I've just talked about that, I just want to go ahead and talk about the music, because that's actually what I really care about. And so let's go ahead and get into it. I have a notebook. If you're interested in following along with a notebook, I recommend it, because you can take some notes. I will be referring to lots of other theory throughout this video, so there are no prerequisites, but I've made videos about all the theory I'll be discussing. So check out my series about practical guitar and music theory, which has about 33 lessons or so in it. And let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'll say as far as songwriting goes is that this song was written in standard tuning, which means that it's written with the strings being tuned to E, A, D, G, B, and E. And that's actually kind of surprising to me because of how open the song sounds. It sounds really like it was in an open tuning, which would sound far more resonant, like it actually does sound. So part of what I'll be trying to do later is analyze, why does this sound so open? Which all of a sudden sounds kind of ironic or something to say that, because of maybe how close-minded the lyrics are. Which, I think that the lyrics are close-minded. Like, singing it is cringy for me. It's difficult for me to actually sing the lyrics. I think it was cringy for me to sing the lyrics then too, when it first came out. But I just feel like, yeah, all to say, let's just go ahead and get started. So there are only 4 chords actually to the verse of this song, and then there are 3 of those same chords in the verse are used again in the chorus, but with the introduction of a new chord. And that new chord is very inspiring. So let's go ahead and get started. The first chord we will be playing is a B minor type chord. And there's different reasons why we know it's B minor. For example, the root note is B. We have a minor 7th interval on top of that. We know this because of what I call the 0x0 practical string rule. This is a way of identifying an interval. An interval is a theoretical principle in music theory which tells you, it characterizes, like major or minor, tells you how to understand the amount of space between any 2 notes. So this is a practical way of identifying that theoretical principle on the instrument. And this is sort of how I try to teach my students it. So that way they're able to recognize intervals easily when they are in standard tuning. We have the 0x0 practical string rule that tells us this is a minor 7th, followed by the minor 3rd, which is the 0xx0 practical string rule. That's how we have our minor 7th chord, because we have both the minor 3rd and the minor 7th. But it's also played open, with the open B and the open E. And so we have a supplementary root, and we also have something a 5th below, so it's a 4th, a suspended. So that's where we get our airiness from, that open E. An E played over a B is a suspended 4th. So that's where we get that airy open sound. The next chord we'll be playing is an E minor 7. But it's a variation of the E minor 7 as opposed to this. Although you could play it, this is the version that's used, which is from the lowest string 0, 7, 5, 7, 0, 0. And again, it has a very similar kind of open sound. This usually tends to happen when you use open strings. So when you just play an open string and something higher on the neck, like, it tends to feel very open. So I could attribute it to the discrepancy between the actual strings and the pitches of the notes you're playing higher up. E minor 7, and we know it's an E minor 7 because the root is an E, followed by a supplementary E on the 7th fret, followed by the 5th fret, which is our minor 3rd, and then finally another minor 7th, right above that. 0x0, 0x0 is how we get our minor 7th interval, again played open, E minor 7. The third chord we'll be looking at is, it was tricky for me to figure this out, so this is actually my second take of doing this video. It is an A7 sus4, but it's a very effortless looking A7 sus4, which is kind of, I think, the appeal of John Mayer, his kind of, well, I guess what they call sprezzatura, his kind of, I'm not even trying kind of thing. This is an A7 sus4 because we have our root, we have our suspended note, we have our 4th, right? Followed by, we have our, what is it? It's a complicated chord because it's, the A7 sus4 includes the root, the 5th, and then the minor 7th, and the suspension 4. That's kind of why it feels a little bit tricky, because it feels a little dominant, but not quite. So we're not yet able to establish whether it's major or minor. That's one of the things that's confusing about suspended chords. In this context, we don't know this chord is major yet, because it's suspended. Also, part of the openness of this chord depends on the discrepancy, again, between the higher pitch string and then the lower one just below it. It kind of has this cool effect, you know? So that also contributes to its open sound. And then the final 4th chord is going to be a D major, but again, a variation. And we can achieve that sound by playing the 5th fret on the A string, followed by the 4th on the D, and then the 7th on the G. And this is another practical string rule to identify your octave, where you'll be playing the same note but separated by an octave, a full chromatic scale that is. That is the 5th fret, or you could say the 0x2 rule. That's how you can identify an octave. Now, the principle of these is based off of what we call the cage system. The cage system and also the idea of equal temperament. The idea is pretty simple in that the cage system shows you all the different variations of chords to play in kind of a standard tuning. And then the idea of equal temperament suggests that those notes are of equal mathematical value so that you can actually move them freely. So how, for instance, do we know that this is an E minor 7? Well, it's actually based off of the C shape. And you say, how do we get from here to here? Well, I'll tell you. So here's C major. If we want to play C minor, we would lower the 3rd. Hear that? Ba-dum, ba-dum. That's our minor 3rd. That's making the chord a minor chord. We're going to leave out the high E because there's a conflict of interest. And that is a C minor chord. Now if we take these and move them proportionately, that's also a minor 3rd, and so is that. That is the idea of equal temperament. And the cage system, where you can learn one shape, like C major, and then using bar chords, play every major chord. C sharp major, D major, D sharp major, E major, F, and so on. So in this case, we've taken the C major chord shape and made it C minor, and then we've actually moved it up all the way till we get to the note E, and then we actually have our minor 7th. And what's interesting is the minor 7th rule applies even down here on the C7. The C7 uses a root, a major 3rd, a minor 7th, and then its octave. 3, 2, 3, 1. And here again, we have that 0x0 rule, where we can identify the minor 7th interval. So if all this stuff about intervals and stuff is confusing you, don't worry about it. You just need to know about the chord shapes to play the song. But what I will say is that knowing about the intervals allows you to identify chords quickly, but it also allows you to create chords quickly. It means that if you wanted to play a minor 7th chord, you would know what you physically had to do to create it. So anyway, these are our 4 chords. B minor, E minor 7, A7 sus4, and then D major. So we'll just write those down. We have B minor, E minor 7, A7 sus4, and then we have D major. Hooray. Okay, that is our verse, and it would go something like this. It's played in 3/4 with emphasis on 1. So it goes something like this. And if you wanted to play that riff, what you would do is you would shuffle between the 5 and the 4, and then the 4 below it. So we're talking about the A string, 5, 4, 0, and you're essentially trying to get that effect. And the way that I'm actually doing it is it was a result of the inconvenience of holding down the note. I actually take my index finger actually. So I play 5, then 4 with the index right there. So 5, 4, then 4 open, and then open A. So something to the effect of, I know a girl, she puts the color inside of my world. I'm becoming Bob Dylan, and she's just like a maze where all of the walls continually change. And I've done all I can to stand on her steps. All this stuff sounds, it's true. It's like under the illusion, under the guise, it is in fact romantic. But then when we get to the chorus, we have one new chord introduced, and as exciting as it is, the message is even more like maybe disturbing. Starting with the B minor 7 chord. Fathers be good. What a delight. I'm sorry, I don't care what the song's about at this point. That just is the most exciting thing going on earth right now. Blah, 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 to your daughters. The message is like not really, you know, it's not overt, but it's because it's like, it's implicit sexism, I'd say. Fathers, be good to your daughters, and daughters will love like you do. And girls become lovers. Yeah, like that. Like, that's not alright. Turn into mothers, also not okay. So mothers, be good. Again, nice, wholesome sentiment. Resolved with the one. Okay. So what's going on? There's definitely something going on. It's this. This chord is just such a delight to play. This is a specific voice of the E dominant. And again, how do we get there? We get there using the cage system. This is the E minor shape. This is the E major shape. And this is founded on the the notion of the cage system and the bar chord. This is because this is a E major chord. That's because this is an F major. Oh, no, what am I saying? E flat, D, and so on, right? You know? Gotta think backwards now. So this is the E, because this is the C. Hopefully that idea of the cage system makes sense, because I think that principle in music theory and practical guitar is deeply inspiring. So, okay, here we have our C shape played as an E. And so we go minor to the major, right? That's what we did. So it's 0, 7, 6, 7. So we've taken that minor chord, we've made it major, but we've kept the minor 7th. This introduces tension. This is a discovered tension, actually. It's not just that it introduces tension, it's discovered tension. And why do I say that? It's because the thing we just heard was a minor 7th, which felt musically expectable. The minor 7th chord here made sense. Now, because the minor 7th was expected, it stays in place, but as we increase the interval from minor to major, it's discovered. It is a discovered secondary dominant chord. And I've done a video about secondary dominants if you're interested in chords like these, how you can use them and the effect they ultimately achieve. But let's, for now, just write down what those chords are. Well, we have the B minor again. So, fathers, be good. And the word good is aligned also, of course, with this E dominant. Good to your daughter. And then we have the same A7 sus4 chord. Daughters. And then we have that D major. And daughters will love like you do. And girls become lovers who turn into mothers again, not necessarily. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. So let's go ahead now and talk about the theory a little bit. Hopefully that makes sense. There's the emphasis of the counting, so like the bum, chicka bum, chicka bum, chicka bum, chicka bum. That's kind of the rhythmic thing. That involves a palm mute. But I do kind of want to take some time just talking about the theory. So in order to analyze this, we usually draw up a circle of fifths, and we're going to go ahead and see how does this fit in with a key, and how does this fit in with the circle of fifths, and where's this E7 coming from? So far, if you want to copy my notes, this is what I've written down. Just going to go ahead and lower the exposure. You can hopefully see that. We have a B minor, followed by an E minor 7, A7 sus4, and D major. That's our verse. Maybe I got to lower it a little bit more. Yeah, hopefully. And then we also have, in the chorus, B minor, E7. I'm going to just go ahead and write an exclamation point because it's pretty exciting, in my opinion. And then we have this A7 sus4 once more, same exact chord, and then finally D major again. I've scribbled this out because I wrote D and then I wrote major, and I thought, well, actually, I'm not emphasizing a D major 7 chord, I'm emphasizing the D major chord. Okay, so these are our chords. Let's draw up the circle of fifths. There's a mnemonic phrase I use. Now the circle of fifths shows you basically all keys, and also in a way you could think about it like notes, but it shows you all keys and how they relate to one another, which is quite a sophisticated tool. It does take some time to memorize it, and it does take some time to even understand what it does. But you discover things along the way. There's always new things you can learn about it because it's just kind of, it's like information being presented in a specific way, but you can look at it in different ways. So the way that we remember the circle of fifths is we think of a clock and we go to 11 o'clock and we say F for fat, C for Caroline. This is not helping today's video. Fat Caroline, G for gets, D for drunk, A for and, E for eats, B for butter, and then F for flies, which tastes bitter or sharp. That is the principle of like kind of remembering the circle of fifths. It doesn't have to be that, but I found that it was memorable for me. No offense to Caroline. Okay. Fat Caroline gets drunk and eats butter, flies which taste sharp. It's important to remember that the distinction is this is sharp and that is not. That's a kind of big deal, I would say. The next thing I'll point out is, that we need to add in some minors, the relative minors. All of these chords have relative minors. So the outer circle of fifths shows kind of your parent signatures in major. And the lower ring that goes directly beneath these, the innermost circle, will show you the relative minors. So you don't need to remember all of them, but it helps to know which ones you have. We know we have a D major. So instead of writing them all down, we can kind of focus on what are the relative minors of the things we see already available to us. Well, we saw a D major chord. We did also see an E major, but I kind of have a feeling like that doesn't make sense. We saw something that looked maybe like an A7. So let's assume that the A7 in this case is in fact a major chord, even though we don't know because it's suspended. So now we have two major chords. Because it's considered an A7, we could technically say this is the 5. We could say D is the 1. That would feel right? Because a lot of the song is going back to the D major chord. The discrepancy of deciding, like, the dilemma, rather, of deciding, like, is this the one, is that the one, really boils down to the notion, does this feel like where I belong? And that changes, that can change in a song even. Like you can feel like you belong at one time and that's chord, and then that can change and say, I heard that chord again, it doesn't feel the same this time. Home can literally move in a song. Yeah. And it doesn't have to do it in a way that makes sense either sometimes. We just try to make sense of it. So here we have A, we have D. So we could establish we have a 5 and a 1. We have E minor subsequent to G. We have subsequent to D, we have B minor. That would make a lot of sense, right? Because we saw B minor chord to begin with. And A has F sharp. And then we actually also saw E7, which was exciting, which is pretty cool. So this is how we would establish a key. We would try to identify a 1 and a 5 chord. And I don't have time to talk about it, but this is sort of how we would get our key. We have a D major, we have an A7. Therefore, this is the 5, this is the 1. We could comfortably play the chord G here, although it does not appear. And we could also play E minor, B minor, and F sharp minor. And in this case, we also see the addition of the E7. How exciting. So in this song, we see a lot of these chords. We see B minor, right? We see E minor, so we can go ahead and circle that. And what do we end up with? We end up with a song that's in the key of D with these following chords. Let's go ahead now and establish what the actual progression is. Well, B minor is the 6, so it's the minor 6 chord, followed by E minor, which is the minor 2, A7 sus4, which is our dominant 5 chord. It feels like the lawful neutral. And then finally we end on the 1. This is a beautiful, really simple song in a way. We have a 6, 2, 5, 1. 6, 2, 5, 1. That is our progression. However, when we get to the chorus, something changes. Instead of playing the 2, we play the dominant 2 chord. We could say the major 2 chord, the major dominant 2 chord, and the major dominant, so we could call it major dominant 2, like that, using Roman numerals, which I have a separate video about actually, to be honest. We could call it this, right? That would be acceptable, but not quite, because actually, when you think about it, that's not really what we're going for. We're really trying to communicate how does this chord E7 relate back to the chords. This is what we call secondary dominant. In this case, Drum roll, please. If I can get it in focus. Please focus. Oh my God. Yes. Okay. We will call this drum roll, please. The 5 of 5. 5 of 5. Rock and roll. So this is the 5 of 5. And this is what makes this sound so exciting, because then it does the very satisfying thing of going to the 5 chord and then finally resolving to the 1. So in a sense, you could think about this like 5 is the step away from home, or rather not the penultimate step away, but the ultimate deciding point. When you play a dominant chord in a key, it is the moment in which you might get the idea to leave. So key change, for instance, you could do lots with the 5 chord, the dominant 5 chord. It is this one moment where you question it. I like to give the example of a house where you are home, but I like to give the example of your room. You're in your room and you walk to the front door, or rather you walk to your bedroom door, and now you're at your front door, and you leave and go to the neighbor's bedroom or for some unknown reason. It's like, and you have all the same problems basically wherever you go, unless you do jazz. And then you transcend everything. So in this song, what we're essentially doing is we are starting with the impression of a minor home, another minor home, to be yet resolved to a very bright, very satisfying dominance 5 chord, back to the 1. And then finally, when we get to our chorus, we're hearing, again, the minor sentiment of home, minor 6 chord. And then this dominant sound. So we've essentially fixed this problem in a way. Whatever this minor 2 was. So throughout the, so like for instance, associating I know a girl. We're associating she puts the color. So we're associating the word girl with this kind of minor 7th chord, this kind of sad penultimate sentiment. Now we fixed it. So fathers be good. Yeah, and we've now fixed that to this kind of 5 of 5. There is more beyond what we're in. So I do think that this is a very effective song. I think it's actually very well written. I wouldn't say it's the worst written song ever. I would say it's so well written it would really piss off a lot of people, given the lyrics might seem outdated today. But I, again, really think it's easy to criticize a song written in 2003, a 20-year-old song, by today's standards. I really think it's more helpful to be remembering like what was 20 years ago like. I mean, I remember there's a lot of stuff going on 20 years ago. So but it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting song. There's a lot to learn from it. So I hope you found this video informative and helpful. If you did, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to stay in the loop. And thanks so much for watching. I will try to make another one of these videos sometime soon. Ciao for now.